Hi, I'm Ralph Preston. Every Tuesday, we get together with our Stroke Buddies, Stroke Survivor support group meetings. And what we try and do is bring you a little bit of science or useful recovery information, something that you can take away and use in your journey. And today, we're really lucky to have Dr. Robin Smith with us. And I met Robin about 15 years ago. Today's my 15th stroke anniversary. Let's see, I was in Mission Hospital for 5 days, and then they transferred me to CarePartners, where Dr. Smith was. Were you there like 37 years, Robin?
38.
38, okay. And I believe CarePartners has a stroke population around 65%. Would that be
something around there? Yeah,
somewhere right around there. So obviously 38 years, 2/3 of everybody coming through is a stroke survivor. He's seen a lot of stroke survivors. I joke and say sometimes I live in Groundhog Day, like the movie. I wake up every day and it's the same, but 38 years and everybody you saw was newly minted. That's tough. So yeah. I wanted to get into talking about life after stroke and how you get there. But first, I kind of wanted to thank you and let everybody here know about a couple of things that occurred in your Dr. Smith had, I believe it was Tuesday and Thursday at like 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
3 o'clock or 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock when
4. Yeah.
Yeah, right when Oprah was on. Anyway, I make a bad joke about. I came. This is the truth, Robin. The first time I came, it was so that I didn't have to watch Oprah on TV. There's not anything wrong with Oprah, but you're laying there in a hospital bed, and you can get out a book, or you can watch TV, or you can go to sleep. I mean, you just don't have a lot of options. So I saw it on the schedule, and I said, "Hell, I'm going. I'm getting out of this room." But I make a joke about it, but it was really valuable for me because I had some of my first eye-opening, awakening experiences in your meeting. So I would have met Robin 5 days in neurology. So I went in on Friday, Wednesday, probably met him Thursday on day 6 after my stroke. And I walked in and there was a half a dozen sorry looking people like me. I was pretty sorry looking too. We were all kind of, not depressed or whatever, but still with that what the heck happened look on our faces. And a couple things happened to me that I want to recognize. And one was that I really liked your style, Robin. You just kind of presented everything. You presented different ideas, and you just like I do now. I just kind of put it out there, and if you want to take it, you take one from this hand or one from this hand, whatever you feel suits you. And I thought you did a really good job of talking about how different people look at things differently and therefore will react differently. But one of the things that also was a big eye opener for me, and I'll get into the second way in just a second, was a guy named Bill came walking into the room, and I can't remember Bill's last name. I remember a couple things about him. Somebody asked me yesterday, what did he do for a living? I don't no idea. He came to CarePartners for a living because the man I saw something one time where an article in the CarePartners newsletter, I think it was, where he had reached 8,000 volunteer hours. That's 4 years at 40 hours a week, folks. And I don't know when he started, but I suspect he probably started when his wife passed away. So Bill walked in as a stroke survivor, and I knew he was a stroke survivor because he had on, it's funny, I don't remember some things, but he had on a red plaid shirt, and he had a right arm that was about 2/3 the size of his left arm. It actually shrunk, and it was pinned to his chest with that red flannel plaid shirt on. And I had two reactions. Okay, this guy's obviously a stroke survivor. Look at that arm. And he just walked in here. Then that was powerful for me. Okay, he walked in here. There's life after stroke. And the other thing was, and Robin, you know this because we played Ralph and Bill a couple of times after I got released. I looked at his arm and I went, like, my immediate reaction was, no friggin' way I'm going to let that happen to me. Bill was married, and I think his wife lived about 10 or 12 years after his stroke, and she nagged him and made him use his arm, and he had some use of it. And when she passed away, he just said, and Bill would say this out loud, I don't need that arm. Yeah. And man, that was like a wake-up call for me. It was every time he said, I don't need this arm, it was like, whap, somebody had slapped me. The other thing, Robin, that's really interesting is in writing up the little blurb about you and thinking about all this, I realized that Bill kind of was the first person that I ever saw that set an example for me in terms of what I'm doing now. I never made that connection till about 4 days ago. Maybe somewhere in the back of my brain, have to ask Dr. Hetzler quite where, but I might have been influenced by him, but it wasn't a part of my cognitive process. It's interesting because two friends of mine said that they talked to me while I was in CarePartners, and I was already talking about helping people. And I told both of them, I have no recollection of that whatsoever, but it sounds like me, doesn't it? Funny how I could remember that Bill had on a red plaid flannel shirt the first time I saw him, and I can't remember talking about helping people, but that's the way it is. So that was a long thank you and intro and talk about mentioning Bill. And so why don't we, you and I, talk a little bit, and anybody out there who's listening, live, of course, because if you're watching on YouTube, you can't ask a question. Feel free to ask the question. This is a formal discussion, and so we'll just have at it. And Ryan Teal snuck in while we were talking. Welcome, Brian. And Robin Ryan and his wife are quite an interesting story. I had them on a few weeks ago. They weren't happy. Ryan had a stroke on the left, and unfortunately suffered from aphasia. But they didn't like, he and his wife didn't like any of the workbooks that were out there to regain your learning and speech skills. So they worked with the experts at the University of Michigan and developed Aphasia Readers, which is a concept I love. You and I know each other, Robin, but one of the things that one of my philosophies is I find that we don't get everything that we need. And one of my philosophies is if they don't give us what we want, we'll figure it out for ourselves. And so I really like folks like Anna and Brian who weren't happy with what they found out there and did something about it, because that's where it all starts. So maybe that's a good starting point for us, because you got all these, you met me on day 2 at CarePartners. You got all these newly minted stroke survivors. How do you deal with like trying to help them realize that this isn't terminal, that there's life after stroke?
Well, first of all, let me go back a little bit and say that Bill, he sold steel for a living. He sold steel in the Midwest. So he sold steel to automakers and like white good people and, like refrigerators, stoves, all that kind of stuff. And he was affectionately referred to as the man of steel. So, last name was Cox. He had so many great stories. And I said, Bill, is it all right if I tell this story? He said, Well, yeah, if it'll help people, I'll bare my soul. That was his attitude. But
Hey,
had
sound
so
just
many
like
great has had so many great Bill Cox stories, and then I started having Ralph Preston stories, and so I had a lot that could keep us going. But one of my favorite stories about Bill was that he first of all he had a stroke. I think he was 53 or something
I think
like
it's,
that.
I'm pretty sure he was 58 because I had mine at 58, and I think he
Okay,
was 22 years out because he was right around pushing 80 when I was there. Just
right.
I happen to remember that we had our stroke at the same age.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And I remembered it was in the 50s, and his doctor said, "Well, you'll be dead in 5 years." And luckily for Bill, his doctor died in 4. And so nearly 30 years later, Bill's still going strong, and working with us and meeting with you and doing all that stuff. Uh, the story that I think you're remembering was that Bill's wife would say, "Bill, while I'm finishing dinner, you go in there and do your hand exercises." And Bill would say, "All right, all right, I'll go do my," yeah. And uh and so he would do that. And then after she died and she wasn't around, he quit doing them. And he was a southpaw. Stroke happened on his right side. That's I used to say that's good news and bad news. The good news is, wow, that's really convenient for you in the short term. It's really inconvenient for you in the long term because you're liable to forget that. The Ralph Preston story I used to tell was how you would vacuum your house with your left hand, not because it was easier, but because it was harder. And you had a stroke on your left side, and so you would vacuum. And then when you first started, you probably couldn't vacuum a whole room, and then eventually you got to the point where you could vacuum the whole house, but it took time, didn't it? And
Yeah, it took a
I
little.
don't tell the story about you walking across the driveway barefoot in order to deal with foot drop. I generally didn't tell that story. Do you remember
Well,
what I'm talking about?
oh yeah, because I did it once and I still had pretty bad foot drop. And I'm here to tell you, if you walk barefoot on the concrete and you drag your affected toe about 3 times, it starts bleeding because mine did. It's a kind of a harsh. It's not a therapy that I recommend to other people, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of a maniac. Well, I'm still like, this is post-stroke me. I can't. I don't remember, and I don't. I must have been like off the charts pre-stroke because I'm pretty intense even post-stroke. So I went at my recovery in a way that most people couldn't. One of the things that I did was because Robin and his group were so influential on me, and seeing Bill walk in, despite the fact that um, his arm was pinned to his chest, he walked in. That was profound for me. So after I got released from CarePartners, it was an hour and a half away from my house, so I couldn't drop by. Like Bill lived, 5 minutes away, 10 minutes away, so he came every Tuesday and Thursday. I couldn't do that, but I saw value in what Robin was doing, and I also wanted to be that guy that walked in the room for other people. So I came back. They messed up my meds. Somebody put me on Zoloft or something. I took one pill, thought I was having another stroke. My PCP didn't know anything about antidepressants. Other counselors can't prescribe. And so I ended up going to a guy in Asheville where CarePartners and was named Dr. Ed Entemacher. And he got the pills straightened out. But I also ended up talking to Ed in that whole process, and I really liked him. And he provided some value to me. He's the one who I got somebody pinned the tail on my donkey with a label from the psychology book, like right before my stroke. And I got on antidepressants because I couldn't sleep because I thought I was broken because of this label. And It may have had something to do with my stroke. I don't go there because there are no mulligans. There's no payback and saying this caused my stroke and these people might be to blame or anything. Because, here I am. I woke up 15 years later. I'm having a good life. So there's just no future in that. But Ed convinced me that we all have a little bit of all those syndromes in the psychology book, and that we shouldn't let anything define us, shouldn't let a label define us. And that was big for me at that time. But the point of this was I continued to see him because I enjoyed talking to him. And he was in Nashville. So I always scheduled my appointments with him at 2:00, 2 to 3:00. And then that gave me plenty of time to buzz on over. Oh, I always did them on Tuesday. So I could buzz on over to Robin's meeting and walk in on all those newbies. And Bill came. Bill was usually there. I mean, I don't think he missed many of them, as I recall. So
No.
Bill and Ralph walking in. What does Robin do? He starts doing what he's really good at, the Bill and Ralph thing. And he would introduce us and say, here's Bill. Bill decided he doesn't need his arm. Bill go, yeah, I need that arm. I forgot he was a little crusty. But he was very friendly in a good way. I mean, he was crusty in a good way. And
kind of salt of the earth, Midwestern type, he's just a good, solid guy. But he did have that kind of, I met his son once, and his son said he always liked to debate, which meant that he always liked to take a, contrary view to whatever, people were saying. I remember he was forever saying, wow, we need a bigger group. We need a bigger room. And I said, Bill, they won't all show up. Some of them are watching Oprah.
Well, yeah. So when we were both there, Robin would say, this is Bill. Bill felt he didn't need his arm. And Bill go, yeah, I don't need that arm. They'd say, this is Ralph. He saw Bill walk in the room with that arm and he said, no way. And I would go, that's right, no way. And Bill and I were cool with that, which was a great thing because it benefited the people sitting around with a dazed look on their face, with seeing both of us walk in, seeing us be able to joke like that, I mean, I think that having your sense of humor returning is one of the big steps towards getting back towards, I was going to say normal, but I don't think there's anything as normal. Normal changes every minute, every day. And so, nobody's going back. I always say, if you had a twin brother and you had a stroke and your twin brother didn't, 6 months later, your twin brother can't go back to the day before your stroke any more than you can. So it's like, I don't quite understand why stroke survivors think that Sherman and Peabody are going to, land in their front yard and with a Wayback Machine and take them back to the day before their stroke. First of all, they probably had underlying issues that would cause them to have a stroke again, wouldn't they? I did. I had high blood pressure. So you take me back to the day before my stroke. Maybe I don't get on my exercise bike the next day, but sooner or later, I'm going to blow up with a high blood pressure. So what are some of the, I don't want to really put you on the spot too much. What are some of the things that you thought about and techniques that you use to try and get people to start the healing process in terms of the fact that, there's a couple of big things you have to accept in the beginning when your life gets turned upside down. It's not the end of the world. Oh, that's a tough one. And that you can do something about it. It's under your control. So what are some of the things that you
One of the things I keep thinking about, Ralph, is and you and Bill were great examples of this, and that is tenacity and just kind of hanging in there and just continuing to chip away at it and continue to work at it. And Bill was raised Christian Scientist, and I don't know that he cared much about that in his later life, but he did have what I described Bill died, and I went to his funeral, and I remember talking about it, and I said, you know, he wasn't so much into orthodoxy, the right beliefs. I think he kind of soured on that, but you got to think like I got to think, but he did believe in orthopraxy, and that is right practice. And for him, his right practice was keep moving, keep moving. That was his mantra. Just keep getting up and keep going. And, sort of the fake it till you make it kind of, you've heard that before, but for him, it was just stay active. I used to talk about how my own personal theory of gravity and my own personal theory to gravity is that the gravitational pull is stronger under couches and beds, and that the longer you stay on the couch or in the bed, the greater the gravitational pull, primarily on your butt. And that's my own personal theory of gravity. Most people don't have their own personal theory of gravity, but I do. But that was entirely consistent with Bill's approach of, just get up and go, get up and do it. And that's what got him to our place I guess it was toward the end, it was just every 2 times a week. But early on, he was part of our transportation. He volunteered to transport patients. He would push wheelchairs around. So
he did I mean, to get in 8,000 hours, he did more than show up for an hour twice a week at your group. I mean,
that's, yeah.
If you were bopping around, yeah, we're all in wheelchairs. But if you were, going around CarePartners headed to therapy or something, you'd always see Bill. You see him every day.
Yeah.
I think the story I heard was he didn't show up one day, and
Yeah.
and then they went to his apartment and found he'd passed away.
Yeah.
He was that reliable that everybody knew when he didn't show up one day that
Right.
something was wrong. So,
Which is a good reason to have a volunteer gig and to be that consistent. It's almost like a life alert kind of thing. Where in the hell is he? I mean, he ought to be here, and then
right.
starting the wheels in motion to find out
Well,
where you are and how you are.
and I know that was a few years after I was there, and because I followed him and you for a while, I then moved to South Carolina. It became more difficult to come to your meetings and things, being a 5.5 hour drive instead of an hour and a half. But he got to live to be 83 or 84, and he got to wake up dead, and he got to help a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
right there's a life after stroke. Bill found meaning in what he was doing, I think, very much. I don't think he didn't seem like a robot or anything. He was kind of crusty, as I'd kind of forgotten, but you reminded me. But he was awful damn friendly too. He said hi
Yeah.
to everybody.
Right.
Everybody. He knew everybody too, because I guess he was there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the gravity. I read a thing about when you get old. It had a bunch of things that you should do, but one of them was make up your bed so you don't get back in it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's addendum number 1 to Smith's law of gravity.
Mm-hmm,
Make up your
mm-hmm.
bed
Good.
so you don't get back in it.
Yeah.
Of course, we're here laughing, and there are people out there that can't get out of it. So,
Right. Right.
I think about that, it breaks my heart. It's interesting because Bill was kind of empathetic under all that crustiness now, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. I think just my own situation, and you have to relate to something, and part of my own situation of having newly retired, it's a real process, and I expect it's not completely separate from or different from any other kind of retirement. 40% of the people who don't choose to retire, they it just is forced on them through either layoffs or illness, or like having a stroke, or any number of other things. They move the jobs to Mexico or something else. And so, part of what I have said for years is that, you're not going to want to live without meaning, purpose, and joy. And so how do you find meaning, purpose, and joy after retirement, after stroke, after breakfast, after anything? What are you going to do for that? And I said, generally speaking, meaning, purpose, and joy are in the direction of other people. And so how do you make those connections? You were talking about analog watches and earlier when we first started, it was one of my volunteer gigs is at an elementary school, and I'm a reading buddy. And so so this kid didn't know how to use an analog watch. So we're talking about how do you tell time with a regular watch, what we refer to as a regular watch. But in addition to having somebody to read to, and again, it's different for everybody, but that's part of
I think the process is similar in that you have to redefine yourself, and you have to realize that you have to create your own happiness. It's not something that's like out there that you can find and pick up and bring home.
Yeah.
You bring it home I found through community. And when I left CarePartners, I said there are 5 things you should do after a stroke, and I don't remember all of them. I remember 1, 2, and 5. And I remember that I did the first 4 of them was eat right. I was already a vegetarian, exercise. I had my stroke on my exercise bike. There were a couple more that I was already doing. And the last one was don't isolate yourself. I call it building community. We're social creatures, and we find I think we find that joy in relating to other people. So it's real important post-stroke not to isolate yourself and to try and engage with whatever community you have and build on it. So that's good. So you're doing some volunteer work in your retirement.
And that's part of the difficulty of psychopathology. I mean, since I'm a psychologist, I occasionally feel obligated to sound like one, but most of the time I try not to. But the problem with depression and anxiety is that they're self-perpetuating. You're anxious about stuff, so you do less of what could, it's that classic approach avoidance. The longer you avoid something, the more it grows and grows, and it becomes more and more frightening. The same with depression. Depressed people say they're no fun and nobody likes them, and they're kind of right, because it's just difficult to live with depressed people. And yet the self-perpetuating aspect of depression is, boy, you're in that hole, and how do you dig your way out of that hole? Well, I guess the classic notion is, well, stop digging first, but then after that, I think what you're saying is others are part of the solution. Bill Cox's mantra of get up and move is part of the answer. Obviously medication, but that's not my first choice. I think getting up, moving, and finding people to talk to is a first couple of moves. Sometimes medication's necessary, just because, as I used to say, you're kind of you're fighting an uphill battle. It's not a level playing field. It's you're really going against fighting against your own biochemistry with depression and sometimes anxiety, and so that you need a little bit of pharmacological help along the way. But you're going to get some pharmacological help, naturalistic pharmacological help, just by moving, just by getting up, just by not going back to bed, just by finding something that gives your some meaning and purpose. So
I tell people to get back into their hobby or find a new hobby. They'll say, "Oh, I can't do my old hobby with his hand." Well, find a new hobby. Find some things you're passionate about. I believe in talk therapy more than pharmacological help, but I was on antidepressants for, well, about a year and a half. I was ready to go off them at about 6 months, but we were getting ready to move to South Carolina, and my wife said, "Moving's stressful. Would you mind staying on until we make the move?" And so once we made the move, I said, "Okay, I'm ready. You ready for me to do this?" And she said, "Sure." So I did. I found it to be a valuable tool. I bring that up. It's mostly guys, but there are actually some women out there that think like it's some kind of like weakness or fault or something
sure.
to rely on antidepressants, and I see them as a tool that can have in your toolkit. Doesn't mean you have to pull it out and use it. And if I was given a choice between, so I did talk therapy and some antidepressants. And if I was given a choice between one or only having one, I think I'd choose talk therapy. Um, you know,
I would point out that's a false dichotomy. You don't need to choose one or the other. You can always do both, like you did, and it
I
served
did.
you well. But yeah. I'm not a prescribing doc anyway. So in fact, now I'm a retired person anyway. So I but I agree with you. I like, a buddy of mine used to say every thought you think affects your biochemistry. And so, if you're feeling like you're on the shelf of life and that you're isolated and you're not doing anything that's enjoyable, that's going to create a pretty dismal biochemistry in your body and mind. And so that's part of why it's important to
Well,
do.
I'm a big believer in the universe returns to you what you put out, and that if you're not careful, you can create self-fulfilling prophecy, like you're talking about. You're a negative biochemistry. That's why how that's why I use the word survivor. I'll correct people. I started correcting people at probably at CarePartners who said victim.
Right.
Because I think that the more you think of yourself as a victim or anything, the more likely you are to become one. So it's important to keep positive thoughts in your head. Uh, I guess I had this the first time I got released from CarePartners, and there was only one physical therapist in Franklin, and I didn't particularly care for him. And I asked him about the form versus distance. He said distance. The PTA, the physical therapy assistant, chased me out into the parking lot and said he's wrong. Form is more important. So I called back to CarePartners to my PTs there and asked them about the whole thing. And they had me start over, walking on my heels and such. I stopped going for distance and worked strictly on form. And I was doing what I call pattern walking. As I was like walking my best pattern, I realized something about there's two kinds of brain patterning. The type I'm doing where I'm rebuilding connections between my damaged brain and my muscles. But there's also another type of brain patterning, and that's the narrative that we run in our heads. And if you run a negative narrative, I think you're more likely to have negative things happen to you. So I think it's real important to wake up grateful, use positive affirmations if you need to, move. Yeah, move. And also when you move, pay attention to your progress, because it's like you can't see your hair go gray, so as you get better, you can't look at the mirror 6 months ago and say, "Oh, I used to be like, I didn't used to be able to do that." So when you first tie your hair back or tie your shoes or do your first sit to stand stuff, remember that stuff, and remember that you're making progress, because we all have bad days. You have bad days even if you don't have a stroke. the secret to that for me was try not to string them too many of them together. Fake it till you can make it till tomorrow, and hopefully tomorrow you wake up like, hey, the glass is 3/4 full. So that was the way I dealt with it, and I had some crappy days. It's funny because there's a list of things that you should never tell somebody who's depressed, and number one is just get over it. But isn't it ironic that at one point I actually said to myself, not out loud, but in that little voice in my brain, I said to myself out loud inside my head, Ralph, you need to get over this. So the one thing that you don't want to hear when you're depressed is the one thing that you have to tell yourself, in a sense, to get over it. I find that ironic.
Right. Yeah, I remember I was with a bunch of, actually, I think they were occupational therapists, and they were grousing about their lot in life. And they were saying, oh, man, this stinks and blah, blah, blah. If you ever want to piss them off, just tell them, you're responsible for your own happiness. They were so mad at me. I mean, somebody that's just, on a rant, enjoying just their outrage. That's the last thing they wanted to hear. May have been true, but it was the last thing they wanted to hear. I think that the other thing that I thought about, Ralph, when you're talking about depression and anxiety, and I think men have some special ways that they manifest some of that stuff, and it's usually
ignoring it.
it's usually in ways that are more comfortable for them, and that means being pissed off and angry about things. And anger is a great way to defend against fear. It's a great way to defend against despair and lack of meaning, lack of purpose, lack of joy. It's a way of sort of I'm not the problem, it's the problem. That externalization that is it's a cop out, but it's so easy and it's really common, and we're all tempted to do it. That anger's my emotion of choice. That's it. It always feels good to be pissed off. It doesn't get me anywhere. You're talking one of the things you said about just get over it reminded me. I sometimes joke about how my wife, she's a Midwesterner too, so she's got that kind of tough-minded sort of thing. And I said that, and she's not a therapist, but if she was a therapist, her therapeutic style was, well, you're stupid to feel that way. Well, that's not exactly going to be helpful, Pam. And she doesn't really say that, but she just kind of, it's like, I'm not going to let you get too far down this pity path here. I'm going to call you back and say, we got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this, because it's, again, that kind of tough-minded style. Some of that tenacity, some of that tough-minded style is, it's darn helpful. It really is. Some of the things that we haven't mentioned yet, and I've been going for a while, and I haven't used the word acceptance. And acceptance is kind of, it's a magical, there's some magic to acceptance. And I struggled with acceptance because I confused it with giving up, giving in, resignation, throwing in the towel. That was sort of what I thought of as acceptance. And I finally got to the point of seeing acceptance as just making peace with the only reality that you have. And once you make peace with the only reality you have, then you can start working on it. You can start addressing this only reality that you have, and you can get to work, and you can work hard, and you can vacuum with your left hand. And, even though it's harder, you can, do all these you can go out and volunteer, even though it's harder. You can make the bed so that you won't get back in it, even though it's harder. That's all part of acceptance. I had a psychologist friend who he did cardiac rehab. I did stroke rehab. So, we had a lot of things in common, but he he was way out ahead of me in terms of the acceptance that helps calm the heart, that helps lower the blood pressure, that helps, focus the attention in a functional and positive way. Um, and he died. He died 2013. And I struggled with that too. And it was my son who pointed out to me, he said, "So Walt's still helping you with acceptance, even after he's gone." And I thought, damn, yeah, you're right. You're right. And I think we all struggle with that. What does it mean to accept and engage instead of deny and blame? Um, so
I can't believe you said that. I got something I've been looking away. I've been listening, but I'm looking away for a sec. We'll see if this works. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, we said the exact same thing. That's something that I learned from these groups. So let me stop the share. Stop the share. I'm not very good with Zoom, and if I knew I was going to be doing stuff with Zoom, I'd have stuff lined up. I wouldn't look for it while we're talking. But I found that because in these groups, I try and a lot of people have groups just own the groups and they just moderate them. They don't generate any content. I see myself as a content generator. And when I first started this 6 or 7 years ago, on Facebook, I member 15, 20 groups, and I would go to all the groups and answer all kinds of questions. And every time I talked about acceptance, it seemed like people thought I was talking about quitting.
Yeah.
That acceptance in some way equals giving up. No, Michael J. Fox, I heard it once. I need to find the darn clip again on YouTube. He explains it the best explanation I've ever heard. And it's basically he's saying, no, it's like accepting the fact that I say there are no mulligans in life. You don't get to pull out a brand new golf ball and drop it there and not take the stroke against yourself. Stroke. Wow.
Stroke again.
Yeah, because you save a golf stroke with a mulligan, but you can't save a stroke. I mean, there are no do-overs in life. So Michael J. Fox explains it, and of course, he's a perfect person to explain it because everybody looks at him and goes, "Oh, thank God!" There, but for the grace of God, go I. And he basically says, it's dealing with the cards that you're dealt. It's facing reality. But a lot of people look at it as quitting, and so I made that meme. For that purpose. And I figured I may as well put it over like a deep knee bend that most people aren't able to do. Why not? So I have to put it over something because I'm a photographer and I think pictures draw people's attention. And also I don't steal pictures. I'll find one of my pictures. I got a couple 100,000 of them, literally.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm the guy
still taking pictures.
You
still taking pictures?
Yes and no. So today I'm going to probably go to Brook Green Gardens, which is one of my favorite places. We could talk. Billy, here's your chance to ask that question about stroke anniversaries since it's mine.
Yeah.
I don't get a cake made or anything. I don't invite friends over and make them celebrate it with me like you would a birthday, or anything like that. But, I do it every morning when I wake up. I don't thank God that I'm awake or anything, but I'm a morning person. I wake up with enthusiasm and I'm glad I'm alive. I do that every day. I did it today. And I guess I had a counselor at 6 months. I had a pastoral counselor. I don't know if I ever told you this, Robin, but I had a pastoral counselor, and she was married to the pastor at her church, who apparently cheated on her with one of the parishioners, and they got divorced. And my 6 months, my stroke coincided with her divorce, and she was having a hard time with her divorce at 6 months. And she started telling me about how tough anniversaries were. Well, you want to talk about self-fulfilling prophecy? I listened to her, and I had a really hard time with 6 months. So when 1 year rolled around, I said to myself, I'm not going there. How do I not go there? Okay, well, I don't go there by, not rolling over, don't roll around in the whole pity thing. So I came up with the idea of doing things that I like to do. So it was actually, at 1 year, it was actually a reaction to 6 months. At that time, I was doing calendars with the land trust. And so I said, what do I like to do? It's a beautiful day. God, it was a beautiful day. And I said, what do I like to do on a beautiful day? I like to go out and take pictures. So I went out and took pictures. And one of the pictures I took one of the pictures I took that day, red buds and scooters, made it into the calendar. And so ever since then, I've just done things that I enjoy. So like I said, I don't have a birthday party or anything like that, but I'll make sure that I work in the garden. I like working in the garden, or I go to Brook Green Gardens, or I take some photographs, have a good meal, just kind of relish being alive. It's not,
So,
so many
Ralph,
people don't understand that. They go, oh, I'll never celebrate that awful day.
excuse me, Ralph. If I ask you a question, if you didn't have the stroke, would you still celebrate life?
That's a very good question, Billy. I rarely have, I'm taken back, but I am a little bit because I want to answer it right. Yes, because I'm passionate about everything I do. I figure if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. It's worth being passionate about, or else don't bother with it. So yes, in some sense, but I do think that the stroke gave me a new appreciation for life. I, like Dr. Hetzler, I had a right side thalamus stroke and a hemorrhagic, and guess what? If you have an ischemic stroke, about 13% of people die that day. If you have a hemorrhagic stroke, about a little over 40%, so more than 3 times, die that day, and another 10% die within a week or so. Basically, they have some kind of hemorrhage that they can't stop or issues. So yeah, so I had a basically 50-50 chance of living, and I think that has in some ways influence my thinking positively towards, still being here. This morning I was thinking, all right, 83, 25 years. I'm 73 now. I was thinking this morning, okay, maybe I can make 25 after the stroke. I'll be 83, but hey, you got to have goals.
I don't think you would have changed, Ralph. I think you would have still been the same person, stroke or no stroke. I think you would have still been the same person, a caring person, somebody that cares about other people, and that's just how it is. But people take strokes as a way of saying, "Oh God, I could have died." And you could die of anything. You could die of a cancer. You could die of a cold. You could die from pneumonia.
And you can die by having that attitude. In a sense, if you embrace that attitude, you're in a sense dead. Not
what I'm saying is
medically dead, but so to answer that question, I've always been a pretty empathetic character. I actually learned a story about myself. A couple of you have heard this. My ex-wife told this to me a few months ago, and she said that my mom told her this story, and so I believe it's true. It also, once again, it sounds like me. So back in the day, of course, there was no streaming or whatever, but The Ugly Duckling was on. So my mom, Hans Christian Andersen tale, So my mom sat me down in front of the TV and she came back. I guess it'd been half an hour later, wouldn't it? Because everything was a half an hour back then, or an hour. No streaming, no oddities because of commercials and people tuning in. Well, she came back half an hour later and apparently my fists were bald and I had tears streaming down my face. I was 4 years old. And she asked me what was wrong, and I told her I was upset the way that the ugly duckling siblings had treated the ugly duckling. Of course, I didn't know the word sibling at the time, but so I've always been empathetic. But I will tell you, Billy, that over the last 5 or 6 years of doing this, I started Stroke Buddies 6 years ago in February. And I've been running Young Stroke Survivors Support Group a little longer than that. I've been involved in them. So I got involved in helping people. And the more I help people, it seems like the more empathetic I got.
But I think you would have helped people no matter if you had a stroke or not. I think you would have helped people. I think you would have helped people no matter if you had a stroke or not.
Probably. But because I picked up I had a video company. I started in 83 when I came back from my honeymoon. Of course, I was still out of my den by 86 or 87. We got an office in downtown Charlotte. And in 1987, I started helping Habitat for Humanity with my video camera doing free videos. So, and I sold a company in 2000. And during that 13 years, I probably did 50. Somewhere around 50, Charlotte Rescue Mission, Durham Rescue Mission, did about 50 free, full-length nonprofits, videos for nonprofits. So things that we would charge IBM $10,000 to do, we did for free. So yeah, I would have helped, and actually I find I have to be careful with empathy. I've gotten so empathetic, like, I don't know. I recently watched the earthquake the day after the earthquakes in Turkey. I was sitting here and just tears streaming down my face. I have a real hard time with things I can't do anything about. I can't help them in any way. Yeah, I can mail them $50, and I did. But there's a lot in life that's out of our control, and I have a hard time with that, being empathetic. So I think the answer to both questions is that the stroke in some ways enhanced or made some of those tendencies that I already had stronger. And I'm not unhappy helping people. The prayer of St. Francis says, it is in giving that we receive.
What I'm saying though is you would have been helping people no matter what you had. A stroke, pneumonia, no matter what happened to you. Your personality didn't change because of that stroke.
Yeah, well,
if I could interrupt this is Bruce
sure.
Kessler. Yeah. If I could interrupt for a minute. Yes, what you both say is true, but of course, it depends on where you had the stroke in your brain. If you had it in some parts of your brain, in particular your prefrontal cortex, that could change your personality drastically, and there's nothing you could do about it. When I was in the hospital, a neurologist told my wife that she should prepare herself that I would not be the same person if I survived that I was before. Now, he turned out to be completely wrong. I think he was not a very good neurologist. But there are cases of people that have had a stroke in the prefrontal cortex, the front of the frontal lobe, and to change their personality drastically. There was one woman who talked to me about her father-in-law, who had been a very nice, kind person. He had a stroke in his prefrontal cortex, and he became very mean and annoying. So it's not something he wanted to do, but it happened because of the area of the brain that was affected.
Right, but
well, and Rob, in case you don't know, Dr. Hetzler is actually a neuroscientist. He taught at Lawrence University for 43 years, and he also suffered a stroke about 11 years ago, I think.
11 and a half, it's going on 12 years. Very good. You've got a good memory, Ralph.
Yeah, I actually do. It's funny. I can remember the shirt that Bill was wearing. Let's say we lose.
Where did
Robin.
Doctor go?
I can remember the shirt that Bill was wearing, but not talking to my friends saying I was going to help people.
Well, you've got a visual memory, a strong visual memory.
Yeah, I do.
I think we lost Robin.
Yeah, I know we did. He took that 12 o'clock stuff literally, didn't he? No, something happened.
Something happened to his internet.